afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the City Club Forum. My name is Herb Cam. I'm president of the City Club, and let me extend a special welcome to all the ladies and women in our audience today. Before I introduce today's guest, let me quote from some of her previous utterings. The Equal Rights Amendment is an attack on God's plan for the family and the plan of our founding fathers for giving us a government with separate powers. God has assigned different roles and different missions to men and women. There are fundamental differences between the sexes. The author of these statements is our guest today, and I'm pleased to tell you that she is, of course, Phyllis Schlafly, perhaps the nation's most outspoken opponent of the Equal Rights Amendment. Mrs. Schlafly has traveled the country far and wide for a number of years. Let me tell you also that she's an attorney, an author, a broadcasting commentator, and a syndicated journalist. She 5 times has been a delegate to Republican national conventions. You want to repeat that for the network? She has been chosen by various publications as one of the 25 most influential women in the United States, one of the 10 most admired women in the world, and one of the 10 most powerful persons in the state of Illinois, where she resides in a community called Alton. Without further ado, I'm happy to introduce to this ecumenical audience, politically speaking, Mrs. Phyllis Schlafly.
Thank you very much, Herb, for that provocative introduction, which you did not clear with me. And good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a very great honor to be invited back to speak to this prestigious club. I've been looking forward to this event. Those quotations that Herb gave you at the beginning of this afternoon are apparently not subscribed to by some people in this country, and so I've titled my remarks this afternoon, Do We Want a Gender-Free Society? You might ask why we pose the question that way, but apparently there are certain people in this country who would like a society in which we are denied our right to make reasonable differences of treatment on account of gender. And as indicated by those quotations that Herb gave you, I do think that men and women are different and that in certain areas they have different roles, which is apparently the most obnoxious 4-letter word to the type of people who really want a gender-free society. So I would like to suggest to you today some thoughts for the areas in which these concepts would impact. First of all, there is the area of the military. Now, the military is an area in which our society has always had rather clearly defined roles for men and women. In other words, there have been women in the military for many years and many wars, but they had an identifiably different role. A number of years ago, those advocates of the gender-free society began to try to obliterate or eliminate the different roles for men and women in the military. That was what happened when they eliminated the WACs and the WAVES, which some of you may remember served a great purpose in World War II. They don't have them anymore. We have a sex-integrated military. The same notion was what brought about the admission of women to the military academies. And we began to get a lot of propaganda in this country in behalf of the notion that we should have a fully sex-integrated military, that there really isn't any difference between men and women, and that in all aspects regarding the defense of our country, women should be treated absolutely equally with men. A lot of people didn't think that this was really happening. As one who's debated this subject for many years, I found that many people, like some of those in this audience, a number of years ago, thought that that was simply an incredible proposition, that anyone would believe that women should be treated exactly like men when it comes to the U.S. Armed Forces. And then in January of 1980, President Jimmy Carter called for the draft registration of men and women. That was a big shock to a lot of people who didn't know what real equality meant. And so we had quite a national debate on that issue. I put together something called the Coalition Against Drafting Women, and we decisively established in both houses of Congress that the Congress does want a different treatment for men and women in regard to the draft. Both houses of Congress decisively rejected the Carter proposal. Even his own leadership rejected the Carter proposal that women be treated just like men in regard to the draft registration and the draft itself. Those advocates of the gender-free society then continued their efforts. They took their case to the U.S. Supreme Court. And it was fought out for many months before the Supreme Court. The principal organization promoting the feminist ideology and the ideology of a gender-free society, which is called the National Organization for Women, filed a brief. Well, thank you for proving my point that there are people who do want a completely gender-free society. But in any event, the National Organization for Women did file a brief with the U.S. Supreme Court calling for the drafting of women when men are drafted, saying that the exemption of women from the military draft makes women in this country second-class citizens, and that the exemption of women from the military draft subjects women to some type of brutality, and that service in the military would be a politically maturing experience for women. Well, that's a point of view, but they did not sell their idea to the U.S. Supreme Court any more than they were able to sell their notions to Congress. The Supreme Court last June the 25th, in the great landmark case of Roster versus Goldberg, rejected that notion and upheld the right of our society to have a complete gender differentiation at the point of the draft and draft registration. The armed forces are not required to pretend that there is no difference between men and women, when in fact we all know that there is a significant difference between men and women, which is particularly relevant to the matter of the conduct of the U.S. Armed Forces. When that decision was handed down, the president of the National Organization for Women called the decision a tragedy. I, of course, called the decision a great victory for common sense, for the right of the American people to be able to defend ourselves, and for Congress to establish these differences of treatment between men and women. But in any event, the push to make the armed forces completely sex neutral and to really put over a gender-free U.S. military really continues. Under the Carter administration, they had a woman in charge of affirmative action for women in the military named Kathleen Carpenter, who was forever pushing women into the non-traditional jobs and bragging about how women were being assigned to every type of job that they could possibly get by with that had been traditional men's jobs. The number of women in the armed forces has increased very significantly. Ms. Carpenter has now been replaced by another woman who apparently has the same views. Her name is Sharon Lord, and in fact she is called Dr. Sharon Lord, and she has been making statements recently saying that they must get rid of the barriers that prevent women from serving in all tasks, and specifically calling for the repeal of U.S. Code Section 6015 and 8549, which are the laws which exempt women from military combat duty. Now, you know, there are a lot of people in this country who might think that it was all right to draft women. But I think it's fair to say that even the majority of those are not in favor of assigning women to military combat. You should realize that the aggressive advocates of the gender-free society are on record specifically as wanting women in military combat. In November of 1979, under the push from these people in the preceding administration, the U.S. Armed Forces held 4 days of hearings on the proposal to repeal the laws that exempt women from combat and assign them to those jobs. We presented wonderful witnesses to show why that was a foolish thing to do, and our arguments were so persuasive that the committee never even voted the bill out. But apparently Dr. Sharon Lord has now newly called for the repeal of the laws that exempt women from military combat. They seem to be determined to bring about a fully sex-integrated military. And more recently, Secretary of Defense Caspar Weinberger made a statement in which he called for aggressively breaking down the remaining barriers that prevent the military from making full use of the capabilities of women. Well, now the only barriers that prevent them are the actual in most cases, the combat infantry, but in any event, the combat jobs, the jobs that actually call for engaging with the enemy. And this is proceeding rather surreptitiously. A lot of people don't know that it's happening. And I think there should be a national debate on this because I believe that those views are not in accord with what the majority of people want. Somebody might ask, why should there be different roles for men and women in the military? I think the experience of all history indicates that this is so. In any event, for those who need some updated statistics, among the volunteer women who are in the military today, between 10 and 15% of them are pregnant at any one time. There's government statistics. And you know, under these notions of having a gender-free military, the Army is not permitted to discharge a pregnant service person. They must keep her on the job, and she gets the same pay, and it is difficult to see how that contributes to the combat effectiveness of our military. You also have the very high attrition rate among the volunteer women. You see, what happens is the Army recruiting offices are all the time rushing around trying to get women to volunteer, and I support their right to volunteer, get the same pay and rank and fringe benefits and all that, which they do. But the traditional type of women's jobs in the military fill up very rapidly because that's what most of the volunteer women want. And so the recruiting officers then are trying to encourage the prospective volunteer women to take the non-traditional jobs. And a lot of them do, but almost half of them do not finish their term of enlistment. When they get in it, they find out they really don't like it as well as they thought they were going to like it. And so we have had some reduction of combat effectiveness in that area. So these are problems that I think that the American people should confront. And after all, the armies of all potential enemies are almost exclusively male. I think we should look to the examples of the other countries that have tried the full integrated use of women in their combat forces, such as Russia and Israel, and see why they abandoned it, why they tried it, and why they have resolved never to do it again. And the Soviet Army, for example, today is 99.5% male. And I think we should learn from the mistakes of other people. Now, let's move into another area of the advocates of the gender-free society, and that is the matter of the workplace. And again, we find a certain number of people who want us to have an economy which is fully gender-free. In other words, where there are an equal number of men and women in all types of jobs and all categories of jobs. Now, there are some of the radical ones who would like the women to have all good jobs and the men to be home doing the diapers and the dishes. See? I think the men should know that that is what some of them want. But then there are the more reasonable ones who... the more reasonable ones who really only want a workforce of 50% men and 50% women. Now let's examine this for a little bit. In the economic sphere, slogans have had a very great impact on this country. And a few people can remember some of the very effective slogans in the economic, political field in past years. New Deal, Fair Deal, New Frontier, Great Society, we owe it to ourselves, are you better off now than you were 4 years ago, and whatever. Now, there is a very important slogan in the economic field which is relevant to this discussion. And the slogan is equal pay for equal work. Now, when you really examine it, that's the most non-controversial idea I can think of. I have never met anybody who is against equal pay for equal work. And so why do we keep hearing about it? Why do we keep hearing that this is a vital economic slogan today? Well, let's examine it a little further. What do you mean by equal pay for equal work? Now, what the law means by it is the same pay for the same job with the same type of seniority and the same number of hours a week and the same type of work and the same type of industry in the same part of the country. Now, that's what equal pay for equal work means. That is the law of the land. It's been the law of the land since 1963 when the Equal Pay Act was passed. It was reinforced by the Civil Rights Act in 1964. A whole new commission was set up in 1972. Some people violate the law, of course. You always have some law violators. They've had to pay multi-million-dollar settlements in penalties and back pay. You're always going to have a certain percentage of law violators, but equal pay for equal work is the law of the land today, and I don't know anybody who opposes that. And yet, we still hear about it. So what do they mean? I think some people think it means that the nurse should be paid the same as the doctor and the secretary the same as the boss. Now that is not what it means, even if the secretary works harder than her boss and thinks she's just as smart. It really doesn't mean that. We have another auxiliary slogan that has come along with this, which is represented by the 59-cent button. And this purports to put across the idea that women earn only 59% of what men earn. Now, they have not been able to produce a single woman in the United States who earns only 59% of what a man earns for the same job. Not a single woman. And if they could produce one, it would be a violation of the law, and the employer would be subject to severe penalties. Now, what is that figure? That figure is the government statistic that is the average wage paid to all women as opposed to the average wage paid to all men. Now, that is not the same thing at all, and it is no evidence whatsoever of discrimination. It is evidence of the different career choices that women make. Whether you approve of it or whether you want a different society in the future is really irrelevant, because the fact is today that the overwhelming majority of women in the United States have simply not been in the workforce all their lives. The majority of women have not been in a paid job most of their lives. They have spent years in the home. And you simply have not been building up seniority on the job if you have spent those years in the home. There are many, many differences for why the average wage paid to all women is different from the average wage paid to all men. The average woman has been on her present job only half as long as the average man. The average woman is 11 times more apt to leave her present job than the average man. The average woman works fewer hours per week than the average man. Figured in that government statistic are millions of women who may work only 35 hours a week, which is considered to be full-time employment, and also millions of men who work full weeks plus overtime at premium pay. And most women will reject the overtime pay if they get the opportunity. Millions of men in the blue-collar jobs do dangerous, heavy, he-man jobs for which, such as miners, construction work, longshoremen, oil riggers, or whatever, for which they get high wages and should get high wages. Most women like the nice inside sit-down jobs in an air-conditioned office. And that is the trade-off women take in terms of pay, because there are few women who like to be coal miners. There are 3,000 female coal miners in this country. There's no bar to that. If you want to be a coal miner, you can go apply. You will probably even get an affirmative action job. But the plain fact is that most women do not want those jobs. And at any rate, they don't have them. Then you look at the upper level of the salaried or professional jobs. Some people seem to think you get these jobs as highly paid doctors and lawyers and vice presidents of corporations right out of college. It just doesn't really happen that way for anybody, men or women. And in order to become the vice president of whatever, it really takes years of career commitment. It takes all those nighttime work, all those weekends, all that career commitment to your job. Now, the majority of women have simply not been willing to do that. And when you look around at the minority of women who are on boards of directors of big companies, the reason is not discrimination. The reason is because 20 and 30 years ago, smart, capable, talented women with 2 degrees like myself made a different career choice. The career choice to be a wife and mother. And we really get very fed up with people putting down that career choice or saying that it's less good or less fulfilling because it isn't valued in terms of money. But it does mean that the women who made that career choice will not, at the age of 50, be getting the same income as a man or woman who has made that career commitment, those weekends and those overtime hours for 20 or 30 years. The Wall Street Journal ran a news story which said that the average female doctor sees 40 fewer patients per week than the average male physician. Now, that's not because women are lazy or because they can't get patients. You all know that plenty of people want doctors. It is because women make different career choices in their life, and other things are important to women. And most women simply don't want to make that type of sole career commitment to the one job. There are other reasons, too. We had a son who graduated with honors from Princeton in engineering and a daughter who graduated with honors from Princeton in economics. Now, the pay differential on that, coming right out of college, is $8,000 a year. That's not discrimination. That is a career choice, and the marketplace pays more for engineers. There's no bar to my daughter becoming an engineer, but they would have been perfectly happy to have her. They're encouraging women to go into engineering. But she didn't want it. She rejected it. So I do not feel it is the job of government to get women to alter their career choices, because for most women, there is something else in their life. And I think there are many women today who are what I call the two-career woman. The woman who has made her commitment to be a wife and mother for, say, 20 years, bringing up her children, but then at other times in her life, before she's married or after her children are grown, can do something in the volunteer or the professional or the workplace, one way or another. And I think that's the great advantage. I look upon that as a positive joy of being a woman. But you have to realize that when you divide your life into different careers, at the age of 50, the woman is simply not going to be drawing the same salary as the man who has been working in the same job all his life. And that is what explains the difference in the pay. It is not discrimination. It is those different career choices. And if we ever have a society in which the average pay to all women is the same as the average wage paid to all men, we will have a society in which the role of motherhood has been eliminated. Now, that doesn't mean mothers will be eliminated. People will still have children. But it does mean that the role of motherhood, in which the woman devotes her life to bringing up her small children will have been eliminated, because those are years that are not measured in money. And I personally believe that those years are more rewarding, more fulfilling to women. But if somebody else wants to make a different choice, I applaud her right to make a different choice. And there's nothing the matter with that. But you will find that her value and joy in those years of homemaking are simply not reflected in dollars and cents. Another aspect of this problem is the new slogan of equal pay for comparable worth. And you should really understand what this means. The people who are promoting this type of society know that equal pay for equal work is the law of the land, so they're not satisfied with that. They now want equal pay for comparable worth. And what that means is having a government agency or court establish federal wage control. We should be clearly understand what that means. They brought a case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court. It was called County of Washington versus Gunther, and they won it. And the issue in this case was the differential in the pay given to male prison guards and female prison guards in the state of Oregon. Now, it was admitted in the case that it was not equal work. The male guards guarded 10 times as many prisoners as the female guards. The female guards did clerical work for a good bit of the time. It's a known fact that male prisoners are more violent and commit more crimes than the female criminals. And it was admitted in the case that it was unequal work because the male guards were risking their lives every day. The Supreme Court upheld the right of the female guards to sue for equal pay. They didn't establish equal pay, but they said you can sue. And this is what has opened the gates for billions of dollars worth of lawsuits. Now, who is going to decide? If you have equal work, people can come to a reasonable decision. But if you're going to evaluate the equal worth of the female and male prison guards, then you're trying to move into a society in which some federal judge or some federal agency is going to set wage control, and I really don't think that's what the American people want. In the area of the family, the advocates of the gender-free society are really trying to move us into some type of equality in the family. Of course, that really depends on getting your husband to do half the diapers and the dishes. Somehow that's pretty hard to do. I have no objection to anybody who wants to do that. I think people ought to be able to order their own marriage the way they want to. It does seem, however, there are not a whole lot of husbands who want to be house husbands for all their lives, although some of them, many of them, are willing to do it for part of their life. And so the advocates of the gender-free society are moving for the solution to their problem to the U.S. government. And what they want to do is establish a principle of taxpayer-financed child care. And you have to understand the rationale of this. Now, the rationale was best stated in a report which was made right here in the state of Ohio. In 1975, the governor of Ohio set up a state commission in order to study the effect that the Equal Rights Amendment would have on state laws. And they came up with the result, among other things, that the equality principle required the state to set up taxpayer-financed child care centers for all children, universally available regardless of need. And the rationale behind this is that it is so unfair and oppressive of society to expect mothers to look after their babies. And so this must become a governmental responsibility. Now, we don't know whether that would be the result, but we do know what the advocates of the gender-free society really want because it's all laid out, and it has nothing to do with need. It is a matter of hoping that women can be fulfilling themselves in the workforce, and it is a vision of the home as something which is oppressive and confining and belittling and demeaning to women. we find that these views of society have brought about significant changes in the textbooks of our country. The gender-free advocates have brought about a very cutthroat censorship of the elementary school textbooks so that they are eliminating all pictures of women in the home and women with babies in order to encourage young girls to grow up thinking that they will be coal miners or construction workers or something else rather than take on the role of wife and mother. Now, I believe that strong nations depend upon strong families, and that child care should not be primarily a governmental function. I don't think we could ever pay anyone enough to give the kind of loving care, of self-sacrificing, round-the-clock loving care that mothers give to their own babies. And I think it is very important that we recognize the goals and the tactics of the advocates of the gender-free society, because I do believe that family survival and our nation's strength depend on making common sense differences of treatment between men and women. Thank you. Okay.
Thank you, Mrs. Schlafly. Today at the City Club, we are listening to an address by Mrs. Phyllis Schlafly on the subject, Do We Want a Gender-Free Society? In just a moment, we'll have our traditional question and answer session, but first, a few announcements. Let me remind all of you, especially you newcomers in the audience, that the City Club welcomes your membership at all times. It is because of your support and support of others like you that we are able to bring distinguished speakers like Mrs. Schlafly to this forum, Cleveland's nationally famous citadel of free speech. Just stop by our office or call our office at 621-0082 for more information. Today, as always, we have students with us from area high schools, 10 high schools as a matter of fact, who are participating in our Living Seminars program, which we sponsor in cooperation with the Cleveland Board of Education and with the support of Sohio. Students with us now are from the following schools: Bay, Beechwood, Brush, East, Euclid, John Hay, Max Hayes, Parma, St. Augustine, and West Tech. Would you young people kindly stand and receive our welcome? As is our custom, these students will be meeting with Mrs. Schlafly for a seminar of their own following our forum. Next Wednesday, our new leaders group is sponsoring a program by way of response to today's forum. Two attorneys, Leslie Brooks and Charles Greer, will speak on Equal Rights Today for Women. The meeting is open to all members of the City Club and their guests. The tariff is a mere $3. That'll be next Wednesday from 5 to 7 p.m. here at the City Club. There is no significance whatever to the fact that next week's speaker will be the president of the National Gas Supply Association. He is... I figure I might as well get the crack in because somebody else would. He is Nicholas J. Bush of Washington, and he is, as I've said, the national president of the National Natural Gas Supply Association, an organization representing 85 major and independent companies that produce 95% of the nation's natural gas supply. And his topic will be the decontrol of natural gas. And now for the part of the program for which I know you've all been waiting with bated breath. Please keep your fingernails in your purses. Alan Davis, our executive director, is in the front of the room. Bob Conrad is in the rear of the room. You're free to ask questions. Make the questions, please, brief, if you will. No speeches. Let Mrs. Schlafly address herself to the points that you make. And we'll have the first question now from Alan Davis and his guest.
Ms. Schlafly, if I may call you Ms. As I understand your approach, you feel that many of these problems are already covered by law and that in general we don't have to change much. If that's the case, Why is it that you're coming into Ohio and Cleveland and all these other places instead of staying home in the idyllic life you described? No. No, I'm serious. I want to know what motivates you, and how do you feel when you come into atmospheres, as you have, and you find that you're so deeply hated? I mean, does it bother you?
I always figure the person who hates hurts only herself. The person, I don't have any hate for anybody, and if people are filled with hate and bitterness, they are the ones who have the problem. It's a free country. I believe I can travel anywhere in any one of the 50 states without having to apologize for that. As far as the Equal Rights Amendment, it's beaten. Nothing that we say here today is going to affect that one way or the other. I did think that this forum would be interested in one of the great national issues of our time. I came here in 1974 and addressed another issue, and I would have thought that your members would be willing to listen to a point of view they might disagree with without hissing or having hate and bitterness.
Mrs. Schlafly, I hate to refer to my career in fatherhood, where I did have my share of diapers and dishes, and I think you left out vacuum cleaners. At my age, it hurts your back. I have a question in regard to women who have opposed your views. I will avoid the term previously directed to you. That's hate, but people who do oppose your views. Women who have fought for better pay closer to the pay of men. Women who have succeeded in advancing and upgrading opportunities for women to obtain better jobs in business, industry, journalism, law, and medicine. Mrs. Schlafly, don't you believe you owe a vote of thanks to the women who have opposed you and have advanced the status of women in America?
Well, I don't owe them anything at all. I worked my own. The reason I have my college degrees is because I worked at night to give myself an education. And I worked very hard for everything that I got, and I don't think I owe them anything. I think the women who did work to advance themselves and were successful, that's fine. I cheer that on. As far as the whole movement that we're talking about, the radical women's liberation movement, which started about the mid-1960s, they had nothing to do with putting sex in the Civil Rights Act. That was done before their movement was born. And as I look around, I don't see that they have contributed to the happiness of women. I think they have broken up a lot of homes. They've made a lot of women unhappy. Really, if you want, Betty Friedan has a new book out called The Second Stage, in which she is beginning to see that some of the points that we have raised about women and their different aspirations are very valid. And she describes in that book a lot of the young women who bought their line when they were in their 20s, but now when they're in their 30s, they're having second thoughts. And you know that in the upper levels of industry today, we have a great wave of women in their 30s who are now deciding they want to have babies and be mothers and stay home. And I think that the young woman today, if she's looking for a role model of a woman who is what I call the two-career woman, she will have to look to our movement and not to the women's liberation movement. Because we have been able to build a life that has priorities in order and that has success in family as well as success in other activities.
So I have a brief comment and one question. My comment is that I'd like to remind everybody in this room that propagandists derive power from the frustrations of their opponents as well as that of their supporters. And my question is this. Now, you seem to imply that the traditional differences in roles of sexes are justified because of different differentials in requirements for physical strength and such things, coal mining, and the fact that men do physical jobs and work outdoors and things like this. My experience, it seems to me, indicates that the wave of the future is where machines are going to do a lot of this stuff, and we're going to have an information society where it'll be more important about how you can communicate and how you can think. And I think women think just fine.
Oh, I do too.
Now,
oh, I do too.
And just
I think our movement is proof that women are just as smart as men.
Very good. Then I'd like to, yes, the question is, don't you agree with this? And if so, doesn't that, I mean, how do you counter this argument that these differences won't be that important in the economy in coming years?
Well, I don't see the future that way, but there's nothing to stop it from becoming that way if it's going to come that way. If carpenters and plumbers and bricklayers and construction people are not going to have to lift those heavy things in the future, or if we have a new breed of women who can lift them just as well as men can, there's no bar to that taking place. I mean, those jobs are there. There apparently are 3,000 women in this country who want to be coal miners. They are coal miners. It's all right with me if they're coal miners. But when you get to the military, I think you have something very different because it is an area of compulsion. When you have a draft, that is compulsion. And even when you sign up, you have to do what you're told. And you're not free to quit like you can quit if you don't like the construction job on the high ladder up there. And I don't think that it should be the job of the Constitution or the government to coerce women into these types of jobs on the ideology of the gender-free advocates. Now, for those who want it, let them take it. Now, there apparently is a fraction of 1% of career-age women in this country who like and want the military life. It's all right with me. I just don't want it forced on all the rest of us.
Mrs. Schlafly, I believe you mentioned that on the boards of directors of corporations in this country, there are very few women serving on those boards of directors. And do I understand you to say that because many women choose to have a period of motherhood, et cetera, that that would then sort of preclude that since they don't have seniority, we should continue to have a very small number of women on boards of directors?
Well, how do they pick their boards of directors? Don't they pick presidents and chief executive officers and vice presidents and successful people from various other companies and professions? That is the way boards of directors are selected. And the plain fact is that they do not have anywhere near as large a pool of women to select from as men. Now, if the society changes and they have a large pool of women to pick from, then that's another story. It's just that I don't think some governmental or whatever should come along and say you are arbitrarily required to have your quota. And I personally support equal employment opportunity. May the most qualified get the job, the promotion, the whatever, regardless of sex or whatever.
Mrs. Schlafly, assuming gender differences and the fact that the military is sort of the epitome of macho masculinity, why do you spend half of your time talking about the women in military where presumably women don't have that much interest, and why are you insensitive to the needs of millions of traditionally feminine women who are alone, widowed, or divorced, who seek to support and care for their children?
Well, I am not insensitive of that, but I might ask, what did you want me to do? Now, the Equal Rights Amendment doesn't help those women in any shape or form. It doesn't do anything for them whatsoever. But I might ask, why are those women who are in the job force or widowed or divorced or whatever, why are they trying to force my daughters to be drafted? I am not forcing the widowed or divorced woman to do anything in this world. I am not coercive about those women in any other way, in any way. But why are they trying to force upon us the drafting of my daughters? Now, I timed myself during the speech. I devoted 1/3 of my speech to that. The reason I devoted 1/3 to that is because it is the most clear-cut difference of the part of our society where we have upheld and recognized differences of treatment. And everybody I debate on this issue wants to erase the gender differences in the military. Every ERA proponent I have ever debated agrees with me on what effect ERA would have on the military. And they want it, and I don't. And so the reason that's so interesting is because it's so ridiculous and because they don't deny it.
Mrs. Schlafly, I understand why you as a woman selfishly would wish to have women exempted from a possibly life-threatening service to their country, such as the military draft. But I wonder if you have any idea why your position is supported by so many men who, if women are exempted, must take up the slack to risk their lives in women's place. It seems grossly unfair, and I'm curious as why you suppose some men agree to it.
Because I think most of the men in this country are willing and ready to defend their wives, mothers, sweethearts, sisters, and daughters. And yes, I certainly do hope the men in our family will always defend the women in their family. And I hope the men in your family will. Yes, that's correct. It's a very good question. And my sons, for example, are trained as wrestlers. My daughters are not trained as wrestlers. Do not intend. They don't expect to have to be wrestlers. Now, if you want to be a wrestler, go ahead. But I think for most of the men in this country do feel a manly obligation to defend their women.
My turn. Mrs. Schlafly?
Where?
Over here.
Where? I can't.
Right here. This little short person over here.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Okay. What I want to say is, what I want to ask is, when you talk about a choice for your daughters and you sent your daughter to Princeton University, I came from a very low working class family where my father couldn't afford to send me to Princeton or anywhere else. When I reached college age, unlike my brother, I couldn't go out and work on a construction job with my father and make $12 an hour, but I worked really hard as a nurse's aide for $3.05 an hour, and somehow I know that my work was not the same as my brother's, but my choices were limited as to where I could go to college because that work wasn't paid as well as a construction worker. And I would bet that if that type of job was a traditional male-dominated field, that I would have been making more money at that job.
That poses some interesting questions. I guess you think that the nurse should be paid the same as a construction worker. Now that is the viewpoint of President Carter's chief female appointee, Sarah Weddington, whose specific example has always been that she wants the nurse to be paid the same as the plumber. Now, I certainly do grant that at times in our life, the nurse is just as important as the plumber, and the plumber is important too. But I don't think we want the type of federal wage control that is involved in some federal judge or bureaucrat evaluating the job of plumbing and the job of nursing or construction work and saying, yes, they should be paid the same. I think you're asking for a type of federal control that's even far greater, vastly greater than we have at the present time. Now, in the matter of your family not being able to send you to school, the only reason I got to go to college was because I worked for it myself. I worked at night. I worked half the time from midnight to 8 in the morning, the other half from 4 to midnight, and I financed myself through college. Sure, you're limited by reasons of geography. I had to go to the college in the area, and we do face a lot of these problems. It's really hard for me to see what you really want the government to do. ERA doesn't solve any of these problems. ERA doesn't get you in any college, it doesn't get you a job, it doesn't get you a promotion, it doesn't do any of those things. And while all of us do face very difficult problems of different types, and if there's anybody in this audience who doesn't have any problems, I would like to meet you after the luncheon is over. I think you get ahead by hard work, determination, and a positive attitude toward life.
Ms. Schlafly, which civil rights and which civil liberties would you permit, and which would you remove from lesbians and homosexuals?
I'm not in favor of removing any rights. I don't know of any right I'm trying to remove. Now, many eminent lawyers have said that ERA would require us to give marriage licenses to homosexuals. Now, I am not for giving them the right to have marriage licenses, but I would not remove any rights they have. They have the same rights that you and I have: freedom of speech, press, religion, trial by jury, due process, same rights women have, and all that.
Ms. Schlafly, your earlier remarks, I think, alluded to the stereotyping that our society does. For instance, you mentioned the textbooks, which presently, or have in the past, during most of our lives, shown women in traditional roles. I'm interested in what sympathies you have for the woman who chooses to fight that stereotype of the woman in the home and chooses to be the lawyer. And what sympathy do you have for that hard road that she has to go to fight the stereotype that's been built up? Don't you think that elimination of the stereotyping would help her in that regard?
Well, what do you want to do? Is this some kind of thought control? I have argued with people on the Equal Rights Amendment who, when we demonstrate conclusively that it will not give any new right or opportunity, come down to saying that they wanted to change attitudes. Now, I think everybody in this room and everybody in America has a right to your attitude, even if it is a stereotype. What kind of thought control process are we trying to put into effect in this country? If somebody has a stereotyped notion that the U.S. Armed Forces should be dominated by men, or a stereotyped notion that the care of small babies requires the round-the-clock, sacrificial, loving care of a devoted mother, what's the matter with those stereotypes? And I don't see why we should have people who say you've got to get rid of your stereotypes to conform to your new stereotypes. Now, as far as I went to law school after I was 50. There was a large percentage of women in the law school. The law is a very tough, confrontational, controversial type of profession. I know the examinations are all absolutely blind. I don't know what their problem is. They had no problem getting in, and I don't think they're the victim of any stereotypes.
Mrs. Schlafly, as a member of Ladies Against Women, I think you're doing us a great service in warning of the dangers of a gender-free society. I don't think they should go around handing out genders free to anybody who wants them either. And I was hoping you could clarify your position a little bit. Would it be accurate to say that the only thing you think should be free in America is the market?
No, it would be accurate to say I believe in free speech, even for people who are against the Equal Rights Amendment, which is sometimes hard to establish.
Hasn't the difference in the status of men and women in the present workforce come about as a result of exploitation? And what element of the workforce is better exploited than the weak segments of that workforce?
Well, it's not exactly clear to me what you mean by that. Do you mean that women are paid less than men? Is that what you're driving at? Or do you mean because there are fewer women in the workforce than men?
I've stated my question. I think it's pretty clear.
Well, well, then I'll state my answer. No, I do not think women in the workforce in general have been exploited. Now, some people, of course, are law violators. It's just like the overwhelming majority of Americans are law-abiding citizens. We certainly do have criminals. We've got remedies, and we hope, and maybe not too good enforcement of the problem of crime. But the big majority of Americans are law-abiding people. And in the overall picture, I think the American woman is the most fortunate creature who ever lived on the face of the earth.
Mrs. Schlafly, I have to make a statement and then I'll ask a question. Yesterday morning on the Phil Donahue show, they had a segment on the military and drafting of women. 3 women were on the show: a Colonel Foote, an officer in a Army college, Sarah McClendon, a reporter and columnist, and an author of a book, which I have forgotten the title of. They were all pro a draft. What came out in the program was that the colonel said she only had 1 student at the time in the officers' training, but if we could get a gender-free society, that this would take care of this sort of thing. So I'm only bringing that out to qualify what you have just said. My question is on the second part of the Equal Rights Amendment. Would you explain that second section of the Equal Rights Amendment? Thank you.
Yes, thank you for showing these people that there are those who want a gender-free military as well as a society in general. The second section of the Equal Rights Amendment says Congress will have the power to enforce by appropriate legislation the provisions of this article. There are 7 other amendments to the Constitution which have the same language, and we've had 100 years of interpretation. We know exactly what it means. It means turning over to the federal government, to the politicians, to the bureaucrats, and to the judges enormous power not only to enforce but also to preempt state law in any of those areas governed by Section 1. So the net effect would be to turn over from the states to the federal government all the areas that are governed by Section 1, which include marriage, divorce, child custody, adoptions, prison regulations, homosexual laws, insurance rates, and private schools. And that is one of the major reasons why ERA has been defeated. It will not pass. No state has passed it since 1977, and no other state ever will.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Schlafly. I regret we don't have time for more questions. The City Club Forum is adjourned.